Hey guys, how are you? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing a movie review. This movie is a horror film from Italy. Although it's an Italian horror film, it's actually spoken in English, released in the year 2009, directed by Federico Zampaglione, and this film is called Shadow. So Shadow is set in the mountain areas of Italy. You've got this guy who loves to mountain bike, so he's going through all the trails within this mountain, and then he decides to stop over for something to eat at this cafe. So he goes inside the cafe and he realises that a beautiful French woman is being harassed by two local psychopathic hunters. So this guy steps in for this lady to save her, much to the displeasure of these two hunters. He takes this woman outside, a friendship is formed, and they decide to go mountain biking together. But what they don't realise is that these two psychopathic hunters have taken exception to this and have decided to chase them. So there is a pursuit going on deep within these woods, but what everyone doesn't realise is that there is a far greater risk to them all from an unknown presence. Now this unknown presence takes great pleasure at people's pain, and fairly soon everybody's going to be introduced to this presence and everyone's life is going to be turned into a living nightmare. So what that nightmare is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Shadow. Coming into this film, didn't really know what to expect. Now it is an Italian horror film, but I actually will say that I think modern Italian horror really forgets what made Italian horror great in the first place. You know, when you've got Lucio Fulci, Ruggiero Deodato, you've got Dario Argento. The older Italian horror films were very sleazy, very exploitation, very provocative, and it felt like you needed a shower at the end of it. But then the more modern horror from Italy, I think, is very underwhelming. It's very underachieving, and I feel that it doesn't really have the balls of yesteryear. So that was a big disappointment. That's the reason why I didn't really have a lot of hope coming into Shadow. And unfortunately, my skepticisms were realised. I thought this is an incredibly tame film. The best way I can sum Shadow up is to think of Eli Roth's Hostel. Now that's classed as torture porn, and this movie does have the formula of a torture porn film. Basically non-existent characters, non-existent story, fairly good cinematography, but basically a movie that relies on horrific scenes. But then if you have movies like Hostel but take away all of the gore, all of the provocative excess, then that's basically what you've got with Shadow. And so at the end of that, you think to yourself, well, if this movie doesn't have psychological aspects, if it doesn't have a relatable sort of story and you don't invest your time in it, and it doesn't have gore, then what are you waiting for? And unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I think a lot of people are going to be bitterly disappointed with Shadow because it stays confined within the boundaries of safety. Now, I can understand, you know, if there was no gore because of the fact it didn't have a great budget, then at least put time and attention to the things that you can do. And the things that you can do is keeping a solid atmosphere. Now, yes, although I will say that the cinematography was very good, the atmosphere is not sustained to the point where you feel very uncomfortable. And so if you don't have the budget for the gore, at least try and focus on other areas. But it felt like the torture porn and the shocking aspect was the main focus of this film, but it didn't deliver that. And so you're left thinking, well, why would I want to recommend this film? And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. And as a result of that, I wouldn't recommend it. I think gorehounds are going to be bitterly disappointed. I think fans of psychological horror are going to be bitterly disappointed. You know, it does look fairly good, and I think there was a very good villain, but there is no point in having one or two very good elements that are not complemented by anything else, because for a very good horror film, you need many elements that complement each other. And so this movie just feels like a complete waste of time. I just think that there were moments where the score of the film, the soundtrack, was very out of place and it just felt very comical, so it released all the tension. I thought, yeah, there were some moments where the villain actually feels very creepy, but what he does, and because it's all off screen, it just doesn't hit you with any impact. And then you've got a very, very, very silly scene, a twist at the end, that I thought, well, that was a cop-out. That was just an insult into the insult to the viewer who is putting up with the time, taking the time and effort to put up with the 70 minutes of material. Then at the end you've given this stupid twist that kind of defeats the whole purpose of watching the film in the first place. So, I mean, it does capture the beauty of the Italian countryside. I think that, you know, some of the acting was really bad, down from the simple fact that some of these actors, English wasn't their first language. Now this is my exception with this kind of thing, that I take exception to this because when you've got actors who are not speaking their first language in a film, it doesn't come across as very authentic, and because they can't come across as very natural, it feels very forced. And there were some scenes, especially from one of the psychopathic hunters, there was a scene where he was really angry, but it didn't feel natural. It actually felt a lot more funny than it did, intimidating. It's supposed to be intimidating, but because he wasn't very natural in what he was doing, it took you out of it. So I think that if you're going to have foreign actors, from the English language, at least have them speaking in their particular language, and therefore you're giving them every opportunity to deliver a good performance. But the script was lacking, the acting was lacking from a few. Now, the female from the French film Frontiers, she was actually in this movie. She was okay. I think she was the best part of the film, but nothing else felt memorable. And unfortunately, this is a movie that I think is going to bitterly disappoint a lot of people. If you are a fan of Italian horror, this movie is not going to really complement anything. I think it steers off the road of what made Italian horror great in the first place. It tries to make a life of its own, but it fails quite miserably. So overall, for Shadow, I'm not going to recommend this movie. I was really disappointed with it, and as a result of that, I'm only going to give it 1 star. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies. I'll see you later. Bye.